Hello everyone and welcome back to the NPC Dungeon. As I settled my other episode this week, my DM advice episode this week about 4 ways to make your combat a little bit more difficult, I'm going to start releasing my episodes on 3 different days, or 2 days, depending on if my DM advice episode is short like it was this week, in 2 weeks from now. So not next Friday, but the Friday after that. And it's going to be Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. Friday and Saturday are going to be my DM advice episodes, and Sunday is going to be the story episode. Obviously, this week is an outlier. I am going to be releasing my episodes in 3 parts, like I said last week. This week's only 2 parts because, again, my DM advice episode ended up being a little bit shorter than usual. Thank you all again today for taking the time to listen to this. I really appreciate it. So here's the story. You may recall that I said this one is going to be all about a character that I more recently played, and again, that's completely true. Again, I'm going to be more talking about this character and her adventures, and I will be telling a story, and I hope you all like it. So what happened? Let's start just a little bit before the actual campaign this takes place in took place. It begins in one of my own campaigns. I had to take a brief break from DMing for a bit, so I asked one of my players if they wanted to fill in and run a short campaign for us while I was busy. I was still able to play in the game, I was just too busy to DM for a minute. Anyway, my players had come across in my campaign a bunch of zombie dwarfs who didn't attack them or anything. They were actually kind of cool, but my players felt bad for them, so they took them along. They eventually came across a suspicious old man who lived in a hut and seemed to know a lot about the place where my players were going. At this, one of my players cast Dispel Magic. They were apparently a little suspicious of the guy. This did nothing to the man, but they watched as the hut and everything in it decayed before their eyes and listened as a thud sounded from outside. They rushed out to see what happened as the zombie dwarves fell with the thud, lifeless to the ground. From here, the chaos really unfolded as in the ensuing argument, you know how players can get sometimes, the old man tried to shuffle away. This brought the players back together as they turned to him and tried to restrain him. He was really strong for an old man, and that's just because he kept rolling really well to escape, but eventually they caught him, and he really didn't know anything. However, one thing was clear, he'd been out here for way too long. So they did the only rational thing and brought him back to a hydra they narrowly avoided earlier, learning that the two were apparently friends, and reunited them. Yeah, that one got a little bit crazy, but I'm still happy with it. Either way, they continued ahead, and this is where my character that I played was born. One of the players had the idea to cast Reincarnate on one of the dwarves. It hadn't been that long, and he would have been willing, so it worked. But we rolled, and my players watched as the dwarf transformed into a human woman and lied there motionless. She didn't wake up until the start of my player's campaign. We agreed that his would take place in the same universe as mine, so that everyone would still be able to keep their usual characters, but it wouldn't change anything. The players, myself included, were taken away into another world where the campaign was to actually begin. My character was still asleep when the person who'd apparently be our guide showed up and directed us away. The guide told them there was supposed to be one more, and after they figured it out and came to wake my character up, they were certainly surprised, but even more so to learn that she had no memory of what she was before. Either way, the name Brynwyn stuck out in her mind for some reason, so she went with that and continued on with the party. As a quick side note, there is a reason why the name Brynwyn stuck out to her. It has to do with the entire backstory that I made for her. I went a little overboard with it, but I'm still happy with it. If you want to hear more about the backstory, let me know, and I'll tell a story one day. But back to the current story. So what was going on? Well, we all had been transported to some kind of interdimensional survival tournament, a race to the finish through several different dimensions. Brynwyn didn't remember anything, but it was here that she realized just how competitive she was as she sprinted off to the races. In fact, this was a common thing with her. Needless to say, she ended up setting off a lot of traps. She eventually got into the habit of just rushing ahead, trying to be the first to get to a certain place. It was really funny, but again, like I said, she ended up setting off a lot of traps. And as you might have guessed, she could also be a little bit belligerent. I wanted to kind of play her as a bit of a flashy prize fighter kind of character. So every town she went to, her goal was to go straight to the nearest local inn and try to brawl for some extra cash. She had a bit of a taste for flair and the magic to back it up, but she didn't have a weapon on her. That was fine though. She didn't really need one. She was a monk with a level in bard, just for flavor. Then when she wasn't fighting, she was playing her lute, but she didn't remember where she had learned how to play it. And as you may have guessed, her pugnacious nature didn't always work out for her. The first town they got to had a bunch of guards positioned by the wall who glared out at the party, and honestly, to Brynwyn, they seemed like they were up to no good. The party had learned by this point that these people were mercenaries who had apparently taken over the town and demanded payment in return for protection. Brynwyn wasn't a very big fan of this, but she still wanted to get in. After all, they still needed a place to sleep. They refused to let them in, so Brynwyn proposed a deal, a fight. She picked the biggest one and said, hey, if I win, you let us through. If you win, we leave. They didn't like that and attacked the whole party. Now, up to this point, Brynwyn hadn't killed yet. She didn't want to, she was against it, she was trying to avoid it. But as she looked around and saw the guards getting beaten around her, something in her snapped. This is not what she wanted. So she did the only rational thing and proceeded to rip a guy's arm off and beat him with it before passing out drunk on the ground and being dragged to a room to stay in. Yeah, she might have gotten a little bit out of hand right there. Anyway, she was a drunken master, which, by the way, I know isn't actually about drinking, but I think it's funny to play it that way. So every time I missed an attack or failed to check or something, we just flavored it as my character being too drunk for it. But getting back to the main continuity, she woke up in a room after she was dragged to it, overlooking a balcony, over which appeared to be a massive dwarven city in an even more massive cavern. This wasn't right. This wasn't where she was at. A dwarven woman strode into the room, announcing herself as the dwarven god of light. By the way, our DM here handmade a bunch of gods for this, so a round of applause for him. Anyway, the woman then told Brynwyn that she was visiting her in her sleep, which come to think that made a lot more sense to her now, and that she had chosen her as her champion. She was to be Brynwyn's patron, but Brynwyn wasn't amused. Do I have a choice in the matter? She said. The god didn't answer. Didn't think so. She told Brynwyn that she had been watching her whole life, but she didn't get to finish as Brynwyn scoffed. Oh yeah? Then tell me who I am. What are you trying to say? That I'm a dwarf? Well, I'm clearly not, so what do you want? Cut the chase and stop playing games. But she just responded that Brynwyn was making a mockery of her in front of the other gods. Oh, so I'm embarrassing you now, is that it? You chose me, remember, not the other way around. And to be honest, this was really how all of her interactions went. It was really fun to play. They had this almost parent and teenage child kind of relationship, and after she told Brynwyn that the other gods were watching, she couldn't resist, so she took every chance she could to break the fourth wall and directly address the audience. She would punch a guy in the face like 4 times in a row and then look off into the distance and expect something. Every now and then, even our DM said that we would hear a laugh track, and that just added to it. But she had to wake up sometime after this first encounter with her dwarven god of light patron, and there are more interactions like this, so I might tell more of them on future episodes. And she was still in that random inn, this time surrounded by a bunch of kids waiting for her to wake up. They were all interested and intrigued and impressed by what she had done, but she was appalled, thinking back to the scene at the gate with the guards, by how entranced with the violence they must have been, and she knew that her life was no life for them. She didn't think she was someone they should look up to, and when she woke up, she did the only thing that a rational person would think to do, and she scared them off. She made a weird face and scared them off. But one of them stayed. He insisted on learning how to fight to protect his family after all the guards had been taken care of. She resisted at first, but he wasn't giving up, so she taught him the basics, gave him her loot, and headed off on her way. The next place they had to visit was a desert, but more on that in a future episode. Join me next week where I'll finish Luna's story and talk more about running a smooth game. Thanks for listening, I hope you enjoyed it, and until next time, let's learn something.